before we begin and invite Dr. Russell up, I want to just do some housekeeping items. You should have, I'm dropping things, pardon me. You should have received a stapled handout when you walked in. There should be more in the back if you did not get one. And this is kind of an outline for Dr. Russell's class. After the class, Dr. Russell also has another handout for you that'll help after the class. So it'll give you some more insights, but we didn't want to ruin that until after he was done to give you that handout. And then just want to remind you, there's 3 different ways you can take this class. You can what we call the edification track, where you just show up, you enjoy the class, there's no reading, there's no homework, and then you can take a certificate track. And for that, there's two books. Dr. Russell's book, Playing with Fire, which is an excellent book, and Bible Study That Works by David Thompson. And then really there's a certificate track with honors class, and that's Grasping God's Word. Pretty much the same type of content you're going to get from the other 2 books. This just has homework assignments built into it that you have to do. Any questions on that, you can get the syllabus online. It gives you the entire schedule, the reading schedule for all classes. I don't want to bore you with that now. I'm going to put you to sleep now so Dr. Russell can wake you up in a couple minutes. So any housekeeping questions you have, like what do I have to have read by next class, you can go to deepfaith.harvest.org, no www. So just deepfaith.harvest.org. You can get the syllabus, and it has a full schedule for whatever track you're in. So 3 ways you can take the class. With that said, I want to let you know that last quarter we had Brett Kunkel come and teach our first class. And I was telling Brett about our next quarter, which we're at right now. And Brett Kunkel said, here's what you need to do. You need to have someone like Walt Russell come out and teach the first class and get people really excited and really engaged. He's phenomenal. So I one-upped Brett. I said, I'm going to get Dr. Russell for all 4 classes. Dr. Russell got his PhD from Dallas, Westminster Theological Seminary, and you got a master's degree from Dallas Theological Seminary, and he is the professor of biblical interpretation at Talbot Theological Seminary and also at Biola. He has been teaching the Bible for 25 years, and he is an expert in this field. He lives, breathes, and sleeps this stuff. Not only that, so you don't think he's just an academic stuck in ivory tower, but he's been a missionary. He has also been a church planter and a pastor. So he has a heart and a passion at the grassroots level to get people engaged with God's Word. So with no further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Walt Russell up.
Thank you, brother. Well, good afternoon. I was telling Daniel earlier that I was supposed to finish a final chapter in a book I'm writing. This past week, we were on Easter break, and I got so excited about this class that I spent all week preparing our 4 weeks together, our PowerPoints and handouts and all that. So I'm just excited to be with you. So it's a privilege. Let me introduce my wife, Marty. In August, Lord willing, if we're still here, we will celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary. So she is an amazingly patient, merciful woman. So she also is a Dallas Seminary graduate and teaches at Talbot School of Theology, a women's ministry course, and has an incredible ministry to women across Southern California. So she's certainly, not that I cast a shadow, but if I did, she would not be in my shadow. She has her own gifts in ministry. So, well, I'm originally from the Ozarks in southern Missouri. And I don't know if you know much about the Ozarks. It's a pretty humble part of this country. And people sitting on their porch, smoking a corncob pipe, and a car out in the yard up on blocks, and a refrigerator outside, old refrigerator with the door pulled off of it. That's kind of where I'm from. So being from the Ozarks, I was amazed when I got outside of the Ozarks at how many teeth people had. I just wasn't used to seeing that many teeth. It was really, it was dumbfounding to me. And also, this is kind of a tender thing, so I hope you won't take advantage of this, but I was born in Springfield, Missouri, because the little town I'm from in Bolivar, Missouri was too small to have a hospital. So I was born in Springfield, Missouri, and that was a problem, has proved to be a problem, because it's the same hospital that Brad Pitt was born in. And so there's been this confusion between the two of us ever since. It's really been a hassle for me. So. This was last Mother's Day, so here's Marty, and that's our daughter Elizabeth next to Marty. And she and her husband Justin have been married 6.5 years now, and she's a very merciful, passionate person, and so she works in a religious organization to try to help folks that are downtrodden and are taken advantage of by other folks, and has a wonderful ministry in that. And Justin is a teacher, high school teacher. And then our son Jonathan is right next to me, and he was the famous one in the family. I was known as Jonathan's dad for a while. He was one of the original members and was with a band called the Cold War Kids for 6 years. And any of you younger folks familiar with the Cold War Kids, kind of an indie rock band and kind of a unique sound? They were all believers and tried to enter into the music industry and try to make a difference as Christians. So that was a fun ride. But being married and touring with the band was not a good combination. So he left about 1.5 years ago, and this is his wife, Noelle, and they've been married about 3.5 years, and Noelle is in the fashion industry, and she designs clothes. Most of the clothes are sold in Walmart and in Target, and it's toddlers and preteen girls. So she loves to use her skills to help folks that can't afford to buy good clothes, but they make good clothes that are somewhat stylish. So that's a part of her ministry. So. Well, that's the family, and my father's still living. He's 92 and a half, and he and my mom were married 62 years, and she had dementia, particularly was in a nursing home the last 11 years of her life, and this is the kind of roots that I come from. My dad fed my mom in the nursing home 3 times a day for 11 years. And he's a legend in our hometown of Bolivar, Missouri. And just a faithful person. And he has a sense of humor, too. He said, listen, when folks asked him why he was so faithful feeding his wife, he said, listen, I spent $2 for that marriage license, and I'm going to get my money's worth. So he did, and still kicking, and loves Christ, as does all of our family here. So, well, I want to talk to you about hermeneutics today, and it's kind of sad. In theological schools, we use these fancy words, so I want to kind of demystify it a little bit. Hermeneutics comes from a Greek word, that's the original language of the New Testament, hermeneuo, and all it means is to explain or to interpret. And it comes from the Greek messenger god Hermes. So hermeneutics is simply the science of explaining and interpreting texts. And in particular, we originally applied it to the Bible, uniquely to the Bible. So in a theological school, when we teach hermeneutics, it's how to explain and interpret the Bible. And so that's a good part of what my teaching is, and that's what I got my doctorate in. So all that hermeneutics is then is a system for reading and interpreting and understanding. That's all that it is. It's a system, and we all have a system. So I'm not giving you something you don't have, but I want to give you a better system, improve your system for reading and interpreting and understanding the Bible. So that's what we're going to focus on, and we're going to do it by looking at biblical passages. Each time we're together, we'll learn some key concepts in interpretation, and then we'll apply those in the Bible. And so I'm hoping that you will interact with me as we look at these biblical passages, and I want you to talk. I want you to use your voice, okay? So if you have your Bibles, and if you'll turn to Romans chapter 1, we're going to jump in here. I also have our verses on your first sheet of your paper there, if you don't have your Bibles with you. If you would bring your Bibles each week, that would be helpful. This is, of course, in How to Read and Study the Bible, so. Now, we're looking at a passage right at the beginning of Romans. And if you know anything about Romans, you know that this was, in some ways, a very different letter for Paul to write because he didn't plant this church. And in fact, it's a 20-something-year-old church, and he's never visited there. And so this is kind of a unique letter. He's not writing as their spiritual father. He's not writing as the church planter. But he's writing, in a sense, as an outsider. So, and as in most letters, it starts with a greeting. And this is Paul's longest greeting. It's 7 verses. Now, normally, greetings in ancient letters, and we have hundreds of those that we recovered from a trash dump in Egypt where the sands were so dry that it didn't, the paper products didn't deteriorate, called the papyri. So we have letters of every imaginable kind from this time period, from the time before Christ to about 100 years or so after Christ. They're called the papyri because they're written on papyrus. It's a reed that they split and they pound it into strips of paper. So we know what letters are, and many letters, the greeting is 3 words. The first word is the author's name. The second word is the recipient's name. And the third word is hello, greetings. Now, Paul extends this is his longest greeting, to 7 verses. And there's already a lot of theology in there, so it's pretty astonishing. So I wish we had time to go into it. There's a lot of amazing things that he says here. But he tells them his name, and he greets the Romans, and then he says, gives a blessing to them to start things off. Now, our verses 11 and 13, that we want to focus on are in the second section. Now, normally, if you know anything about Paul's letters, after he has a greeting, what's the second thing he normally does? What does he normally, Gives thanks to God for them, doesn't he? It's a thanksgiving, yes. And so look at verse 8. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, because your faith is being proclaimed throughout the whole world. So he finds something positive to thank God for. For example, the Corinthians were wild and crazy and kind of out of control church, weren't they? They were carnal, they were divided and all of that. And so Paul probably scratched his head for a while, thanking God for that. He said, I thank God that you are so gifted. You have spiritual gifts. Now, later on, he's going to say you have no idea how to use them. You use them divisively and all that. But I thank God that you've got all these gifts. Now we just need to corral them a little bit. Okay? So here he thanks God because the faith of the Romans has been proclaimed throughout the whole world. Now, just kind of appreciate this. What would you think the literacy rate in the Roman Empire at this time was, high or low? What would you think? We're all over the map. Okay. From what we can gather, it is around 5 to 10%. Now, the debate in literacy circles is literacy being able to read and write, or is it just to be able to read? That's the debate. What are we going to call being literate, both reading and writing? So the 5 to 10% probably reflects the being able to read and write. And so it's pretty low. It would be a bit higher in Jewish communities, but on the average it's pretty low. So that means most of the folks hearing this letter would never set eyes on it, and because the majority of them couldn't read it if they did. So Paul knows that, of course, so he's writing this letter for it to be heard. So it's for an oral culture, not a reading and writing culture, but for an oral culture. So that means then, after he greets them, that this is going to give you some idea. It's kind of like the introduction to a sermon or to a talk, isn't it? He's going to kind of tell you what we're going to be talking about, some of those things. So, first he says then, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, because your faith is being proclaimed throughout the whole world. I'll be reading from the New American Standard Bible in our times together. Okay, that's the translation I'll use on your handouts. Rumor has it that's the Bible Jesus carried. He was American, wasn't he? Verse 9, he explains, for God, whom I serve in my spirit in the preaching of the gospel of his Son, is my witness as to how unceasingly I make mention of you. Wow, here's a guy who never visited this church, but he prays for them unceasingly. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? You ever get a letter from somebody you don't know and they say, you know what, I've just been praying unceasingly for you. It's kind of like, oh, really? Who are you? It's got a little bit unusual. But Paul knows about them. He knows their faith has been proclaimed throughout the whole world, and he's praying for them. In verse 10, here's the content. Always in my prayers making request, if perhaps now at last, by the will of God, I may succeed in coming to you. All right? They're 20 years old. He's never visited them. Whose fault is it? God's. It was a will of God, not for me to get this done. Now, if those of you that are students, I would suggest you not use this excuse for not getting an assignment done. Teacher, I'm sorry, it just wasn't God's will for me to turn this in today. And my response is, you know what? It's not God's will for me to give you a passing grade. It's funny how that works, isn't it? Yeah. But Paul, he's going to explain later, has been busy in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And so he's just finished with that work, and now he's able to look to the west where Rome is. So he's really serious, and this is true, and he'll explain that later. Now, here's our key verse, and here's our first interpretive problem in verse 11. For I long to see you in order that I may impart some spiritual gift to you, that you may be established or grounded. Now, wow, what in the world does it mean, impart some spiritual gift to you? All right? Now, here's where we need to talk. What is the first thing that comes to your mind as a possible meaning of when he says he wants to impart some spiritual gift? First thing that would come to mind. I'm sorry? Okay, love, all right. Which, pardon? Wisdom, okay. Give them something they don't have, okay. Now, love is a fruit of the Spirit, but it's not one of the spiritual gifts, is it? There is a word of wisdom. So do you think he's using it kind of technically as spiritual gifts, of which, there's about 19 of them listed in the New Testament? You think that's what it might be? That he's coming to give them some spiritual gifts they don't have? You don't think that? Okay, good. You're too smart for that. All right. That's the first thing that comes to my mind, that he's using spiritual gift as kind of a technical sense. That when I come, it's going to be a blue light special on, the gift of teaching. Okay, but that's what a lot of people think, though, is they see this as a possible meaning. And here's how then they reason, and by and large these tend to be our charismatic and Pentecostal brothers and sisters, but they're saying, see, Paul wanted to come and impart some spiritual gift, a technical, using spiritual gift as a technical thing. So that means, they conclude, that getting spiritual gifts is an open-ended process. And that if you want to have, different gifts or better gifts, 2.0, that like Paul was going to give to the Romans, maybe you pray and God will give you different or better spiritual gifts. You see how the reasoning goes on this? That sounds like kind of a stretch, doesn't it? But you already said, it's God that gives the spiritual gifts, right? And who wrote that? Paul. Yeah, that's right. It's the Holy Spirit. And how does he give those gifts? As he wills. The Holy Spirit wills. Okay. So again, a lot of folks think it's spiritual gifts in a technical way, but that doesn't jive with what Paul and the scriptures say elsewhere, does it? All right. So what else could it mean if not spiritual gifts more technically? Stir up your gifts. Okay. Blessing them. So using it kind of less technically. Pardon? Enlighten them. Okay, yes. Pardon? Okay. Teaching them, all right. All right, great point. Sharing some of his spiritual gifts to encourage them. Yes. Okay, can you say it a little bit louder? Okay, all right, communicate to them, explain to them so they can understand where it's coming from. Notice that what's the purpose for imparting this to them? That you may be established. Hey, now this is a 20-something-year-old church. That's a pretty bold thing to say, isn't it? You can be 120 years old, but if you're missing key elements, you may never fully be grounded or established as a church. Isn't that interesting? And Paul says, I want to come and give you something, and we don't know exactly what that is at this point. Could be love, wisdom, his teaching, explanation of things. Whatever it is, it sounds like it's pretty foundational, isn't it? That you will be established, that you'll be grounded in the faith. Wow. Okay. Now, in a lot of cultures, if they hear the word impart a gift, in other words, give a gift, but I have a lot of students from Asia and Asian Americans. What do you think they automatically think? If somebody's going to give you a gift, you need to reciprocate. You need to give something back, don't you? That's a part of most cultures around the world, isn't it? I grew up in the Midwest, and when somebody invited us over to their house for dinner, then there was the sense of responsibility to invite them over to our house for dinner to reciprocate with that. It is interesting, in Southern California, we usually meet people in restaurants. We don't have them into our homes very much. Isn't that kind of strange? See, I'm not from here, so I can talk about how weird the culture is, see? I actually have an outside perspective. I think that's a little weird. We actually have people in our home. We just had some overnight last night. So he's setting in motion this thing of, I'm going to give you a gift, yet to be determined, and they're sitting there thinking, gee, I wonder how we should reciprocate. Okay, well listen into verse 10, verse 12. I'll go back to verse 11 so we get a little context. For I long to see you in order that I may impart some spiritual gift to you, that you may be established. That is, let me explain this, that I may be encouraged together with you, while among you, each of us by the other's faith, both yours and mine. All right? Now this, first he says in verse 11, I'm going to impart something to you. I'm going to give you a gift. And then he says, but this is going to be, there's mutuality in this, isn't it? And the gift I give and the gift you give, they'll be mutually encouraging, and they'll both be an expression of our faith. What I give you will be an expression of my faith. What I'll give you will be an expression of your faith. So whatever interpretation we come up with has to fit that. The gift is an expression of their faith that will be encouraging, both ways, mutually. That's pretty cool, isn't it? The apostle opens himself up to receive something from them and be encouraged by them. I love that kind of perspective. All right, so here's now in verse 13, here's the second interpretive problem that we have. And I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that often I have planned to come to you and have been prevented thus far. See, there's that issue again, isn't it? He probably has been criticized for not coming there before now. So he's trying to deal with that issue, isn't he? I have been prevented thus far. Why did I want to come? In order that I might obtain some fruit among you also, even as among the rest of the Gentiles. Obtain some fruit among you. Oh my goodness. Now, what do you think that means? Obtain some fruit among you. More new believers that you bring about? All right. So it'd be the fruit of evangelism, wouldn't it? The fruit of conversion. I don't know if this communicates to you, but Paul wants to come and have an evangelistic harvest among them. I don't know if that resonates with you at all. Okay. Fruit of conversion, that is converts. Fruit of the Spirit. Okay. Very possible, isn't it? That's another possible meaning, and we want to list our possible meanings. All right? Okay, I only got about fruit of them being grounded in the Word, did you say? Kind of so okay, as he sows into their life and shares his gift, imparts that to them, then they would respond with the fruit and to sow into his life. Because that fruit needs to be an expression of their faith, doesn't it? And it does need to be mutually encouraging. Do you know what the majority view of this is? What the fruit is? What would you guess? Financial support. Oh, what a twisted mind. Oof. Okay, that's possible. Although he never asked anybody for money for himself, did he? That was kind of his policy. The majority view is it's the fruit of conversion. What? Fruit of conversion, converts. He wants to come and obtain some fruit among them, that is, some conversion fruit, some converts. That's the majority view. You look at 50 commentaries on Romans, probably at least 40 plus of them would say that equals fruit of conversion. Now, the difficulty with that, there's several difficulties that we're going to see, but one of them is, how is that an expression of the Romans' faith? That he would come and have fruit of conversion from non-Christians. You see? That doesn't fit very well, does it? But that's the majority view. So much so, if any of you are reading the NIV, New International Version, it says that I may have a harvest among you. So you see, the translation pushes you in the direction of the majority view. See that? With its translation. But the literal translations will have fruit. But that's kind of, we're wondering now, what in the world is that? Have a harvest among you, fruit, and all this. Wow, it's just interesting thing. We got two, these are not huge issues, but these are kind of the sorts of little interpretive things you encounter and you say, what does that mean? Now, what does that mean? How does this, fit together? So, all right, so now I want to give you then a couple of hermeneutical points. That is a point of how language works and how interpretation works. And from each of those points, then, we're going to have a methodology, something we can do to be able to back up that point and express that. Okay, so here we go. Here's the first one, hermeneutical point. You have this diagram on page 2. Meaning comes from the top down, from the larger units of the biblical text down to the smaller units. That's how meaning works. You understand what I'm saying right now when I say right now, because you understand, this is a talk about how to read and study the Bible, and now you're explaining a hermeneutical point, and here's the specific hermeneutical point. See, so you understand that coming from the bigger unit of the text, the genre or type of communication we're having, down to where you can understand the word. And you can understand the sentence because you understand the paragraph. And you understand the paragraph because you understand the larger unit. You see that? My students, at the end of the semester, when I ask them, of all the things we cover in about 40 hours together in a graduate course on interpreting the Bible, what's the most helpful thing you learned? They'd say, this, right here. That meaning comes from the top down, from the larger units down to the smaller. Now, what do we do in the Church of Jesus Christ? Do we read the Bible this way? Do we teach the Bible this way? Do we teach our children to think of the Bible this way? No, we invert this, don't we? We start with a verse. And we have them memorize this one verse in isolation, don't we? And the next week, then in our children's program, they do a verse each week. We have them memorize another verse from somewhere else in the Bible. And then the next week, another verse somewhere else in the Bible. And a lot of Christian organizations teach people this way too, teach adults this way. For example, a wonderful Christian organization, the Navigators, starting with military people, then college campuses and community ministry now, they have a whole Bible memory program. And this is what they do. They have people memorize, 1 or 2 verses together. So we start down near the bottom with a sentence. See that? Now, because the sentences have numbers in front of them, we think that gives you the freedom to pull that sentence out because it's got a number in front of it, a verse number. Isn't that weird? But that's the impact on us, isn't it? And so we write them on cards and memorize individual verses, totally apart from their paragraph. And we actually teach our children to read the Bible that way. And let me just say, there's problems with that. When the Navigators went into the former Soviet Union, particularly into Russia, they translated their whole Bible memorization program into Russian. And they were so proud, they spent months doing this, and then they gave it to the first group of Russian believers, and they looked at it, and they said, these were baby Christians now, they said, we're not going to do this. And the Navigator staff were aghast at that, and they said, why is that? They said, well, you're pulling verses out of their context. You see, we're trained to read literature this way, where meaning comes from the larger units down to the smaller. And so we're not going to just memorize verses out of context, sentences out of context. Baby Christians, see, but that was a part of their culture. And they knew that's not how meaning works. Isn't that interesting? So, folks, we do weird stuff with the Bible and come up with some weird interpretations because we fragment it and we start really kind of down at the bottom of this whole memory thing, or this whole meaning thing, rather than up with the larger units. Wouldn't it be better with our kids, rather than have them memorize 4 verses from all over the Bible in 4 successive weeks, to memorize 1 verse each week out of a 4-verse paragraph, a 4-sentence paragraph. So then at the end of a month, they would have a paragraph to meditate on. Now, wouldn't that be interesting? then they have a whole complete unit of thought rather than a part of it. And they would learn to think of the Bible then in that way. See that? And we can do that with our youth. We can do it with our adults. So this is a biggie. This is a huge issue. Now, if that's the case, if meaning comes from the top down, from the larger units to the smaller, then what kind of a practice or a method do you think we should have for reading the Bible? What should we do to solve our problems, our interpretive problems here? Read through it without stopping. How far? Whole book? Are you saying the whole book of Romans?
Actually, it doesn't take that long.
It doesn't. First of all, let me help you with our terminology. This is a book. Romans is a letter. Does that help? It's just a long letter. That's all. It's a letter. It's not a book. I know we call it a book, but it's a letter. Okay, just kind of psychologically trying to help. Okay, well, it's interesting you come to. Here's my suggestion. Now, given that meaning works this way, read Romans over and over and over and over. A whole biblical book? No, a whole letter. Just a letter. Read the letter over and over and over. You say, wow, that sounds like a lot of work. No, it doesn't take that long. You don't want to get bogged down. You want to read through it and not get stuck on details. You want to get the big picture. You want to get the panoramic view of it. Now, again, we don't teach this way. We don't emphasize this in our churches. And so we end up fragmenting Scripture down to little verse bites, little sound bites, as if those little things are magical in and of themselves. The meaning is in the interaction of the parts with one another. And so to read Romans over and over and over, you would get incredible insight into what Paul may be saying at the beginning of it by getting the whole picture. Now again, he's not going to tell them everything in the beginning because this is a new church. He didn't plant it. They've actually, he says in chapter 3, verse 8, he's already been slandered there by some folks. So he's going to be very careful in his communication, isn't he? So by reading the whole letter, though, you can get the whole picture. Here's what you would discover if you read Romans over and over and over. You would discover that in the first 17 verses, that Paul he introduces 9 topics, 9 different topics. One of those is why he hasn't visited them before. He's mentioned that twice in these first 17 verses, hasn't he? Another one is about the gift that he wants to give them. And another one is about the fruit that he wants to obtain among them. So he introduces 9 topics. And when you get to the end of the letter, to the beginning of the conclusion, Paul revisits all 9 of those topics. Now, what do you think the odds are of that being a random occurrence? No, slim and none, isn't it? This is very intentional. It's very purposeful, isn't it? So it's highly likely then that he's kind of brief when he introduces them at the beginning, and then look how many he gives, a few more verses at the end where he revisits and expands and explains on these things. But folks, you only will find that out if you read Romans over and over and over and over. Maybe after the first or second or third reading, you say, I've read this before. This seems like he talks about this earlier in the letter. And then you realize, oh my goodness, look at this. These 2 sections, then, we call these brackets or bookends to this letter. And the sense is, with those 2 things, these 9 topics, is this is not necessarily what Romans is about, but you ought to read Romans in light of these 9 topics. This kind of gives you the set of glasses to look through. But again, you don't get that if you just isolate and focus on a verse and say, what does this verse mean? See that? This is big picture stuff, and this is the way God intends us to read and study the Bible. Now, we just kind of have to shift and say, well, it's a lot more work. Yeah, it is, more than looking at one verse, but it'll be worth it because you will understand what that verse means and you'll have a real assurance then in using that. So learn to read biblical books, read through them quickly to get the big picture. Not to get bogged down on theological points or this and that, but to get the big picture. It's a different kind of reading, see? Over and over and over. Think you can do that? Sure. It's just a letter. It's just a letter. Okay. Second hermeneutical. Any questions? By the way, I want you to, it's not just for me to beat my gums, but this is for us to. Yes, sir. Yeah.
I think that's what Martin used to justify memorizing verses. Do you think he meant memorizing verses or reading a book over and over?
Okay. When the psalmist says, "Thy word have I hid in my heart that I might sin against you," well, generally, they looked at bigger chunks. For example, when Jesus shrieks from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" We jump to theological interpretation of that. Oh, the sins of the world were put on him, the Father turns away, which may be true. But far more likely, what is he saying when he shrieks, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's the first line of Psalm 22, isn't it? And the Psalms didn't have numbers. It was known by the first line. And so what he's saying is, what is happening to me is talked about in Psalm 22, which has an astonishing description, somewhat poetically, of death by crucifixion, isn't it? And so they would read the whole psalm. And so, yeah, I think they understood, and most people understand, how meaning works. So they at least would do a whole paragraph, a complete unit of thought, rather than a fragment of a unit of thought. But we chop things up in our culture for some reason. I don't know why we do that. Good question. Okay, here's the second point. It looks like the same diagram, but it's actually a different diagram. This is on page 3. If you don't know how the author is using a word that he wanted to obtain some fruit among them, get out your trusty concordance and look up the word fruit. Okay? Now, you say, I don't have a concordance. Well, I would suggest that you get, if you do electronic stuff, you get electronic concordance, or if you use, hardback paper things, get a paperback or a hardback. Get like a Young's concordance. That's what I use. And it's on the King James Version, so it's on a literal version. And it's cheap. It's inexpensive, but it's a great concordance. The old saying, get Young's concordance for the young in the faith, get Cruden's concordance for the crude, and get Strong's concordance for the strong. Yeah. I don't believe that. I use Young's, and it's quite helpful. So that's a tool you do need on your shelf. You need a Bible dictionary and you need a concordance, so that you can look up and to see how this word is used elsewhere. Now, here's the shortcut. The most important usages would be the closest usages, wouldn't they? And that would be in Romans, right? So you'd only start with Romans and see, how does he use fruit in Romans? How can that be helpful to us? And what we're doing now is we're letting the biblical authors speak for themselves. We're not saying, oh, this is what I think fruit means. Oh, okay, it's nice. I'm glad you think that. I want to respect your opinion. But quite frankly, I don't want to base my life on what you say. I would delight to base my life on what God says in his word. And so that's letting Paul and the Holy Spirit speak for themselves, and to see how they're using a word, and if that helps us understand the meaning of it. Okay, now what were some of our options for fruit, did we say? Okay, fruit of evangelism, that's the majority view. Fruit of the Spirit. Anything else for fruit? Spiritual fruit? Kind of good works, okay, in that sense. All right. What about oranges or bananas and pears and that? Are you too spiritual? You don't even think about that, huh? It can't be actual fruit. It's got to be something spiritual, right? You're probably right, okay? Okay, so we're going to look up fruit in our trusty concordance. Here's what I did. I looked it up. And again, best to use the literal versions, because some of them have harvest here, and that'll mess you up, because it may be harvest here, but they may not be harvest somewhere else. So you want to use a literal where it actually gives you, and again, the King James Version, any of these concordances, Young's or Strong's or Cruden's, normally they're geared to the King James, and those are really the least expensive. You can even get them used ones at different places. Okay, here's what you find. I found that there were 4 usages of the word fruit in Romans as a noun. In our verse, 113, 2 times in chapter 6, verse 21 and 22, and then 1 time in chapter 15, verse 28. And then 2 times as a verb in chapter 7. And in that context, the idea of bearing fruit there is in the childbearing analogy of bearing spiritual fruit as if they were, bearing children. And the fruit, you can tell from those 2 little snippets in chapter 6, 21, 22, is it's what fruit or what benefit literally is. So that's what that is. But what immediately caught my eye when I looked it up was the chapter 15, verse 28. Why should that catch your eye and my eye? The bookends. Absolutely. These are in those sections of where the topic is revisited. How about them apples? Isn't that sweet? Okay, so let's look it up and see how it's used there. All right, let's jump over to the end of the book, the letter, chapter 15. Let me begin in verse 21. That's where the paragraph begins. Paul says, actually, let me begin a little bit earlier. Let me begin in verse 17. Therefore, in Christ Jesus, I have found reason for boasting in things pertaining to God. For I will not presume to speak of anything except what Christ has accomplished through me, resulting in the obedience of the Gentiles by word and deed, in the power of signs and wonders, in the power of the Spirit, so that from Jerusalem, starting over on the eastern side of the Mediterranean, and roundabout as far as Illyricum, that's way up in northwestern Greece. Okay, way up. From Jerusalem all the way around in the northern part of the Mediterranean, I have fully preached the gospel of Christ. And thus I have aspired to preach the gospel, not where Christ was already named, that I should build upon another man's foundation. But as it is written, they who had no news of him shall see, and they who have not heard shall understand. What kind of a missionary, what kind of a church planter would we say Paul is in modern terminology? What's the term we would use? How would we describe him? Pardon? He's a missionary. What kind of a missionary? A foreign missionary, yes. Should we call, pardon? Itinerant, yes, he certainly was that, but he's a pioneer, isn't he? He wants to be the Marines, the first people to hit the beach. He doesn't want to build on somebody else's ministry. He wants to be the first person in that area to name the name of Christ. Isn't that unbelievable? Now that's a bold person, isn't it? That's a bold person. And so that was his role on the team, to be go the very first place to talk to them about Christ. And he didn't want anybody else who had already been there. If they had, he'd go on somewhere else. Okay? So that's his philosophy of ministry. That's his role on the team. Look at verse 22 now. Okay, we're getting a little closer to home. For this reason, I have often been hindered from coming to you, but now, with no further place for me in these regions, and since I have had for many years a longing to come to you whenever I go to Spain, for I hope to see you in passing and to be helped on my way there by you when I am first enjoyed your company for a while. Okay, so Paul has been doing pioneer missionary work in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And he says, my work as a pioneering missionary is done there. Now, is there still a lot of work to do? Oh, yes, tons of work to do. But that's for other folks. His job, his role on the team was to pioneer it. And he says, I'm done with that, and now I want to go from the eastern part of the Roman Empire all the way to the western part, to Spain, and pioneer there. And if I'm going to go to Spain, I want to go through Rome, stop on the way in Italy, before I get to Spain, and perhaps be helped on the way there. Well, how could they help him? Well, for one, the language in the eastern part of the Roman Empire was Greek, of which Paul was a native Greek speaker. But in the western part of the Roman Empire, it was Latin. And so it'd be helpful if folks from Rome, Christians, could go with him, that they were very literate and conversant in Latin. That'd be very helpful, wouldn't it? Now, Paul could probably stumble and bumble around a bit in Latin, but it'd be nice to have folks that, spoke it ever since, they were little. That would be helpful. But that's why he hasn't been to Rome, because he's been pioneering in the East. And Rome has had a witness for Messiah Jesus for over 20 years. Why would he want to go there, where the name of Christ has been mentioned quite thoroughly for 20-some years? You see that? That kind of creates some problem with the fruit of conversion view, doesn't it? Why would he long to come to Rome to have fruit of conversion if that's not what he normally does? That's not his role on the team. You see, it doesn't fit. So people say, well, okay, so Paul was a little inconsistent. No, don't blame it on Paul. It's a problem with your interpretation. It's your problem, not his. Okay. So, all right. So that's his role, pioneer, missionary, church planter, evangelist. All right? Picking up then in verse 25. So he wants to go to Spain and be helped there by the Romans. We have him some teammates. In other words, he kind of wants to set up a missionary base in the western part of the empire, because he had one in Antioch of Syria in the eastern part. And that's too far if he's going to minister in the west. Okay, but verse 25. But now I am going to Jerusalem. Okay, what's the deal? You want to go west, and he's writing this from Corinth, right in the middle of the Mediterranean world. He's in Greece, in Corinth. And so he wants to go west, but before he can go west to Spain, he's going to go east to Jerusalem. Wow, Paul, you're going to do a lot of traveling. Why is that? All right. But now I'm going to Jerusalem serving the saints. Serving the saints. He explains, verse 26, for Macedonia and Achaia, that's northern and southern Greece, have been pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the saints in Jerusalem. Wow, okay. A contribution for the saints among the poor in Jerusalem. Why are the saints in Jerusalem poor? Persecution. And before persecution, they sold everything. That's right. In Acts 2 and 3, 4, they stripped themselves of assets because there were 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 new Christians that stayed on in Jerusalem to learn about faith in Jesus, didn't they? They'd come to faith in him at Pentecost and after that. And so they ran out of clothes and food and money. And so in a culture where hospitality is incredibly important, the home folks, the Jerusalem folks, sold homes and lands and businesses and all kinds of things to get this thing going. Isn't that amazing? And then after that, they had famine. That's in Acts 11, at the end of that. And now, more recently, they've had persecution. That's the trifecta, isn't it? You know, stripped yourselves of assets, and then famine comes, and now persecution comes. All right? And so Paul and others have been collecting money for the poor saints in Jerusalem by this time for 12 years. Okay? Verse 27. And he's got this money here from the poor, for the poor from Macedonia and Achaia. And he's in Achaia now in Corinth, the southern part of Greece. Verse 27 is a very important principle. Yes, they were pleased to do so, and they are indebted to them. For if the Gentiles have shared in their spiritual things, they are indebted to minister to them also in material things. Wow. Okay, we got multiple things going on here. Who gave spiritual things? The Messianic Jews, yes. They gave spiritual things to the Gentiles, didn't they? They sent out missionaries, didn't they? Like Paul. They gave spiritual things to the Gentiles. So now the Gentiles are honor bound, yea, indebted, to give back to them material things. You see the principle? This is not a new principle, folks. This runs all throughout the Old Testament and all throughout the New Testament. Those who served in and around the temple, the Levites, the priests in that, they did spiritual things for the people, then they deserved material responses from folks. Galatians 6:6, share all good things with those who teach you the word of God. It's my life verse. Just kidding, just kidding. But see, that's why we support folks in our local church, don't we? That's why you support people here. Why? Because they're giving you spiritual things, and before the Lord, you and I are honor bound to give back material things to them. That's our responsibility. It's not an option. We're indebted to them before the Lord. You see that? And this is true now, not only on a local level, but on an international level. Paul's applying this. Isn't that amazing? Hey, listen, you guys wouldn't have had the gospel if these Messianic Jews in Jerusalem and Antioch and all that, if they didn't send out missionaries. So you could hear the gospel, you could believe. They give you these amazing spiritual things when they were already financially, stripped of assets. And now that they're having very difficult times, it's a good time for you to fulfill your biblical responsibility to give back to them material things. Got the picture? All right, now, we're ready for our verse. Verse 28. Took a long time to get there, didn't it? Therefore, when I have finished this and have put my seal on this fruit of theirs, I will go on by way of you to Spain. What's this fruit of theirs? Ooh, the collection for the poor saints in Jerusalem. That's the fruit? Well, he uses a fruit that it's a euphemism, isn't it? Because when you talk about money, it's like talking about death. We use euphemisms, don't we? If your 14-year-old cat died, I wouldn't say, oh, I understand your cat's died and is rotting in the ground now in your backyard. I wouldn't say that. I would say something theologically questionable like, oh, I understand your cat now is in cat heaven. Cat heaven. Okay. Or we use other euphemisms. What do we use when someone dies? What do we say? Passed away. In German, it's they went around the corner. Okay, what other things we use? Expired. Okay. I like your license. Expired. Okay. Yes. Okay. That's good. Kick the bucket. Oh, you're such a tender-hearted soul. Yes. Yeah, well, see, that's kind of a funny thing, but yeah, I have no idea where that came from, but went home to be with the Lord, yeah, which is very accurate, isn't it? So, but we soften things, and so Paul, in talking about money here, uses a euphemism. They know what he's talking about. It's quite clear, isn't it? Okay. Now, does then fruit is here refers to the offering for the poor saints in Jerusalem. Does that work up in chapter 1, verse 13? Does it? I want to come to see you so that I may obtain some fruit from you. How does he specify the fruit he wants to obtain from them? How does he say that in verse 11, chapter 1? As among the rest of the Gentiles. That's a little social pressure on them, isn't it? Hey, the rest of the Gentile believers, they're giving fruit. I've been getting fruit from them. How about you guys? You need to be a part of this. Now, we don't know, though, they don't know what it means in chapter 1, verse 11 yet, do they? You think a church that Paul didn't plant early on, when he's kind of orienting them to his letter, he's going to say, oh, by the way, I want to come and I want to collect bushels of money from you. You think he's going to say that at the beginning? That's not cool, is it? So he's intentionally vague, and he uses a euphemism. And they don't really know what it means till they hear the end of the letter. Oh, but since meaning comes from the top down, from the larger units down to the smaller, then by the time they get to the end, he's going to develop it, like he does all 9 of these topics. Do you see that? That makes sense? This is good communication, isn't it? Now, does this help us understand at all? Does it help us with some spiritual gift? Do you see that? Reciprocal giving. I'm going to give you a gift, not spiritual gifts, technical term, prophecy, teaching, mercy, all this. No, I'm going to give you a gift of a spiritual nature. A spiritual type gift. Okay? He doesn't say what it is, but he says it's going to be an expression of my faith, verse 12. It's going to encourage you. And it sets in motion the principle of reciprocity, of you reciprocating, because you're going to encourage me with a gift that will be an expression of your faith. And that gift is that you, the westernmost church, now, as far as we know at this point, would be involved in this collection for the poor saints in Jerusalem. Who started the church in Rome? Who would you guess? Peter? No, he hadn't been there. Won't be there for another several years. Well, it's good. They're there. Remember that list of folks in Acts 2 that were at Pentecost? There were a lot of pilgrims from Rome there, weren't they? Jews from Rome and proselytes who were visiting Jerusalem. Some of them came to faith in Jesus, their Messiah, and they stayed on and learned a while, and then they went back to Rome, to the synagogues, the Jewish synagogues, and they started teaching that Jesus is the Messiah. And that was about 20-some years ago. Now, eventually that caused problems in the synagogues, as you can imagine. And there were so many problems that the Jews were stirring up, and by the way, the Romans were pretty anti-Semitic, that the Emperor Claudius kicked them out, kicked all the Jews out, including the Messianic Jews, kicked them out of Rome. And that's why in Acts 18, verse 1, Paul meets Aquila and Priscilla. Acts 18, verse 1. After these things, he left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a certain Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius, the emperor, had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. Okay? So the church in Rome was started by Messianic Jews who got the gospel in Jerusalem. They got taught, they got supported by the Messianic Jews who had already believed and lived in Jerusalem. And once they thought they had trained them and grounded them enough, then they sent them back to Rome, and they brought the gospel there. And it went out to Gentiles there too, out of the synagogue.
It also supports the not being established yet, their immaturity.
All right.
Nothing's changing and not giving that.
Good point. It's that this shows that they're not yet fully established because they're not plugged into the international unity of the body of Christ, are they? They're way out on the eastern or western end there, kind of doing their own thing. See that? So, you see, it's not that hard to figure out what these things mean if we understand that meaning comes from the larger units down to the smaller. And if we read and study the Bible that way. Now, I told you earlier, the majority view of Paul wanting to obtain some fruit among them, Romans 1:13, is the fruit of evangelism. Well, there's two major problems with that. What's the first one? That wasn't what he did. He didn't come into an area where the gospel had been for 20-some years to do evangelism, okay? That was not his role on the team. And he hadn't been wanting to come there for years and years and years so he could evangelize an area that already was evangelized, okay? That's the first problem. What's the second one? They already were Christians. Okay, they're Christians there. And look at verse 13 a little more closely here. In order that I might obtain some fruit among you, even as among the rest of the Gentiles. Did Paul just evangelize Gentiles? No. The first place he always went in a city was a synagogue, if it had one. And if it didn't, like in Philippi, he knew on the Sabbath he went down by the river where he was staying in a van. No, just teasing. Sorry, I had a Saturday Night Live flashback there. Okay. He went down by the river where he met Lydia, where they were doing ceremonial washing. So there weren't 10 males 20 years and older in Philippi, Jewish males, to be able to start a synagogue. So this is the next place. He wanted to start with Jewish people because at least they were monotheistic. They believed in one God. And then he would prove that Jesus was their Messiah. And then he would work outward from that base then to go to Gentiles. See that? So he didn't just evangelize Gentiles. He always started with Jewish people. And interestingly enough, at the end of the book of Acts, when Paul does go to Rome, the first group that he has visit him is a group of Jewish folks from the synagogue. So, okay, questions about this though. Let me wrap this up here, this particular point, and then we'll take a little kind of 2-minute stand-up break, and then we're going to have a test over a passage. Just to get you warmed up, here's the passage that we're going to have our little interpretive test over. Okay, we'll come back to that. All right, so here we go. Here's our summary of what we've been talking about so far, and then we'll take some questions. Since meaning comes from the top down, read the whole biblical book to get the big picture of its meaning. Use repeated readings. Don't just jump on popular interpretations. See? There's lots of popular interpretations on things. Read the whole book, get that big picture, and that will solve the vast majority of the interpretive issues. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them. See that? We solved a couple of them here, didn't we? And then the second thing is be objective and let the biblical authors, the human and the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, speak for themselves. See how the authors are using key words. Look first within the biblical book you're working in. Don't just go and rush to what other people are saying. Let the biblical folks, the authors, speak for themselves. Let's start there. Discipline ourselves to stay with them. Now, yes, sir.
You said go to the concordance and look up the meaning of fruit.
I didn't say the meaning, the usage of fruit. Yes.
The English usage
Yes.
or the Greek usage?
Okay, here's what people asked me in the past. They'd say, okay, what's the Greek word, Dr. Russell, for fruit? And I'll say, karpos. Okay, I said, all right, that's good, karpos. What does karpos mean? I go, karpos means fruit. And they go, well, that's not helpful. Well, did you think knowing the original language would solve the interpretive problems? Karpos, fruit. Pardon? It might, but that word not necessarily. Some words have a range of meanings, yes.
So you're saying that only in English we would get different meanings?
Well, the literal translations will take the majority, meaning of that word normally, and then look at the context of that. And so Paul uses this same term elsewhere. I think it's Philippians 4:17, where he's talking about money, and that they had given to him, and he talks about this fruit of yours. So it's a common euphemism that he uses regarding money. Again, a touchy subject. Paul never, ever asked for money from himself. Never, ever. That's why there was only one church, the church in Philippi, that supported him. Can you imagine the lost opportunity of all those other churches to be able to partner financially with Paul by supporting him as a pioneer missionary and sharing in the fruit of his ministry? Can you imagine the loss that they had of not doing that? Only one church did it, and he didn't ask them. They just did it on their own more than once. Wow. Yes?
Okay, my question is a little bit more about the interpretation.
Yes.
All right. And he was known for correcting doctrine, like in Philippi and in Colossae.
Yes.
And Corinth.
Right.
So could it have been that he was meaning that he's going to bring spiritual correction for the foundation of their church as far as their understanding the gospel?
Okay, excellent point. You're right on the money on that too. The question is, Paul is known for correcting folks' misunderstanding in his writings, but also when he visits there. And yes, the reason the Romans have not been, if you will, fully grounded and fully established is that they don't understand the gospel of God. And look at verses 14 and 15. This is why folks think that Paul wanted to come and preach the gospel, do evangelism here. After obtaining some fruit among you, even as among the rest of the Gentiles, I am under obligation both to the Greeks and to the barbarian, both to the wise and to the foolish. Thus, for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. And we think, oh, he wants to come and evangelize them. No. What he wants to do is to come and explain the gospel of God to them. And he mentions the gospel of God in his greeting. The gospel of God is this plan or program that God has that runs all throughout history, where it starts at creation. He wants to bless the people of planet Earth, doesn't he? But sin entered in, and so God now has dealt with that sin and climactically dealt with it in the work of Messiah Jesus. And so there is this plan or program that God has afoot, the gospel of God, the gospel cause, and he wants the Romans, and he's saying it in a very nice way, they don't get it. What would they have done if they would have gotten it in their 20-some years? Given money. All right. What else?
They would have evangelized the whole continent.
They would have evangelized, their area and Spain. Hey, they're 20-some years ago. People are going to hell in Spain, and they haven't done anything about it. They don't understand the gospel of God. This panoramic program that Paul says in verse 9, in my spirit I serve in this thing. It's not just a message, it's this program that God has. When you believe in the gospel, you become a part of the gospel cause. And that's what Paul says to the Philippians. He said, when you gave to me, we had fellowship, or koinonia, it's a Greek word. You say, what does koinonia mean? Fellowship. Or partnership, okay? When they invested in Paul's ministry, he says we had partnership or fellowship, koinonia, listen to his words, in the gospel. That's Philippians 1:5. It's not just a message, it's this whole plan and program of getting the message out. And Paul wanted to come and teach and explain and unpack the gospel of God to this 20-something-year-old church so that they could be grounded and established. Because it's foundational, absolutely. If a church exists just to keep on existing, sadly, that's a lot of churches' purpose, just to keep on existing, they don't get it, do they? And I don't care if you're 120 years old. You don't get it. You're not grounded. You're not established. You are part of something far grander, aren't we? God is wanting to bless the peoples of planet Earth. And Jesus, our King, our Messiah, commanded we're to go and make disciples of him, by the way, not of us, among all the people groups of the world. And by the way, that's what God said he wanted to do through Father Abraham, wasn't it? Abraham, through you, I want to bless literally the tribes, all the people groups of the world. So Messiah Jesus has come to complete the task that was promised and begun through Father Abraham, isn't it? And if you're a church and you don't get that, then it's not how old you are, and it's not even how big you are. It's how grounded or not that you are. And so that's what Paul, again, he's saying it in not veiled language, but kind of cagey language, isn't it? You know, he's not going to say, listen, you guys don't get it. You're immature. You're not established. And by the way, they are having all kinds of internal problems, struggles between Messianic Jews and Gentile believers. You don't understand the gospel, and you've never given to the poor saints in Jerusalem, so I'm going to come and I'm going to explain the gospel to you. I'm going to tell you how this whole thing works. I'm going to get you guys jacked up about going to Spain, and then I'm going to take your money and, Okay, so he's much more politically correct. He's much more spiritually correct. He's a little more sensitive than that, okay? But you see, at the end of the letter, all these things come together, don't they? We believe in the gospel, and then we become a part of the gospel cause. And you say, well, I don't know how I am a part of the gospel cause. Well, did Jesus give you a spiritual gift or two? Yes. You say, maybe. Maybe he probably did, but I don't know what it is. Well, that's kind of like being on a sports team and not knowing what your position is, isn't it? The game's going on all around you, and you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, and people are bumping into you, and you're hindering some of the plays because you haven't found your role on the team. And those of us who are leaders, that's our responsibility, isn't it? To equip the saints so that they can give, support, be here every time the door opens, and keep their mouth shut. No. And support us in our ministry. No. We're to equip the saints so that who does the work of ministry? The saints. The saints. The saints. How do you do that? Through using your spiritual gifts. I'll be glad to chat with you if you don't know what your gift is. I'm writing this book called The Organic Church, and the subtitle is a little bit in your face, okay? It's growing ministry around the sheep, not just around the shepherds. It's about time, isn't it? That's what Marty and I have given our lives, is to help equipping the saints to do the work of ministry so that we can be about the gospel cause. We got a lot of work to do. There's 24,000 people groups in the world. There's still somewhere around 6,000 or so yet to be reached. These are unreached. So about a fourth of it. Okay. I know you're probably a little tired. All right. Let's take a 2-minute stand-up, and I'm going to time it. All right, now let me clarify. This is not Christian time. This is real time. It's a real 2 minutes, okay? Not Christian 2 minutes. All right. Okay, one last point about our little study in Romans 1, verse 11, 13. Good hermeneutics will lead you to interpretations beyond what you presently know. In other words, did anybody say, oh, I think, impart some spiritual gift to them, and notice it's singular, oh, I think that was, specifically Paul giving a gift of his teaching. Now, we kind of got close to that, but obtain some fruit among you. Oh, it was the fruit is of the collection in Jerusalem. No, we didn't know that, did we? But you see, if you have the good methodology, a good approach, then you're not limited in your interpretations to just what you presently know. And if you just are limited to what you presently know, you'll just keep reinforcing what you presently know. And there's a lot of things that we may not have understood correctly or fully. And so if you have a good methodology in reading and studying the Bible, it will lead you to interpretations beyond what you presently know, to a fuller understanding of God's Word. And that's what we want to do, isn't it? We want to keep growing. We are disciples, and that means learners of Jesus. So I learn stuff almost every day from reading the Bible. And again, your methodology can take you beyond what you presently know. If it doesn't, you'll just say, oh, we don't really say this. We say, essentially, I presently know this, and so I'm going to interpret it in light of the present knowledge I have. And see, we're always limited. We never grow, if that's our perspective. So you need a good methodology that carries you beyond that. Okay. The words of Jesus on page 4 here. Again, I say to you that if two agree on earth about anything that they may ask, it shall be done for them by my Father who is in heaven, for where 2 or 3 have gathered together in my name, there I am in their midst. Now, in what settings in the church do we apply these verses? Sorry, pardon? Discipline. And discipline, what else? Prayer groups. Worship, yes.
Or maybe this conversation about the Bible, about God, like answering questions between, like, maybe even 2 people.
Okay, well, there's 2 of us, so we know the Lord's here. We're numerically correct. We're reading the numerical the minimum, 2 or 3. Is Jesus with you when you're by yourself?
Yes.
Okay, that should show some problems with our typical interpretation. Have you ever heard a worship leader say, well, we know where 2 or 3 are gathered, there the Lord is in the midst, but look, we've got 150 or 200 people here, so we can be absolutely certain that he's here, can't we, numerically? Okay. Worship song, we say yes. We say yes, O God. Where 2 or 3 agree in the power of your name, you said ask anything, and it shall be done. And so we pray for salvation, your healing to come. We believe, O Lord, that these things will be done. So it's ask anything, and it will be done. Wow, it's interesting. Or I had a student that got married during the semester. I don't recommend that. And they got a wedding card. And it says, your wedding. In the cadence of the music, in the footsteps down the aisle, in the flicker of the candles, in the light of every smile, in the pledging of the vows, and in the newlywed's sweet kiss, in the joy and celebration, God is there in all of this. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst. Really? So we just use this as kind of catch-all verses, don't we? In lots of different settings. Have you ever put it in a context? If meaning comes from the top down, these are 2 sentences. Okay? If meaning comes from the top down, not from the bottom up, and if we're going to let the biblical authors speak for themselves, then in this case also let Jesus speak for himself, then we ought to look at a little bit larger unit of thought. What's the next unit of thought up from these two verses? The paragraph. And give me the verse numbers on the paragraph. 15 to 20. Absolutely right. 15 to 20. It's a paragraph, which makes these two verses kind of the big finish, right? This is kind of, it's bringing this complex paragraph to its conclusion. What's the next unit up from the paragraph? Okay. In this case, the chapter. Now, sometimes the chapter things are a little bit arbitrary, but in this case, it's a good chapter division. And if you read all of Matthew 18, you would find that it's all about the people of God and their relationships with each other. Okay? So it's Jesus' teaching that Matthew has put together, of which this is a part of it. And there's more before and there's more after. Okay? So you want to at least look at the paragraph. I did some stuff with Greg Kokel, Sandra Reason, in years past. Did some things when he was on the radio. Is he still on the radio? I don't know. Is he? And did some conferences with him and did this sort of thing. And so he wrote a little booklet, and I'm jealous. I wish I would have written it. He took some of these ideas, and he wrote a little thing, and it's called Never Read a Bible Verse. Never read a Bible verse. ... And then underneath, always read a Bible paragraph. Okay? Never read a Bible verse. It's just a sentence. Always read a Bible paragraph. And ideally, at least if you're pressed for time, read the next unit up. If that paragraph is a part of a series of teaching or a part of a discussion, or if it's in a narrative, read the next section up, kind of that whole. Maybe it's a chapter or two. Okay? That's a good principle to live by. Never read a Bible verse. Okay, so what's this paragraph about? What did you learn in high school English? Can you remember back that far? When I was in high school, it was Old English that we were studying. No. What did they call the first sentence in a paragraph when you were learning about these things in, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, somewhere in there? What did they call the first sentence? Topic sentence. Somebody else, what did they call it? Thesis sentence. Did you ever hear that? Topic, I think when we were in high school, it was topic sentence, wasn't it? Now it's thesis sentence. Okay. All right, so the first sentence in your paragraph ought to tell people what the rest of the paragraph's about, right? Yeah. That's how it works, isn't it? And that's why we always should at least look at a paragraph. At least. Okay, so let's look at this paragraph. And if your brother sins, go and reprove him in private. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. What's this paragraph about? Can we include you sisters in this? Or is sinning a uniquely male thing? Of course, if you answer yes, then you're a liar, and now you're included with us, okay? Okay, so if your brother or sister sins, what's this paragraph about? Discipline, okay. Isn't it interesting? It is about discipline, but is that the end-all, be-all of it? It's about restoration, isn't it? Discipline, hopefully, that leads to restoration. Okay? So that means everything in the paragraph would be about that. Okay? Verse 16. But if he does not listen to you, he or she, brother or sister, take one or two more with you so that, and here's a quote from the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 19:15, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every fact may be confirmed. That's a principle of under the Mosaic law, wasn't it? Don't just let single people say they witnessed something, but ideally establish the facts with 2 or 3 witnesses. And if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax gatherer. Truly I say to you, whatever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And boom, then we have our 2 verses. So, do you think our 2 verses, verses 19 and 20, are about church discipline? Okay, don't humor me. You can tell me the hard truth. How do you know verses 19 and 20 are a part of this paragraph? Again. All right, that's a good key, isn't it? What else? All right. The 2, and then the 2 or 3. Okay. Anything else? All right. Okay. Let's go through the thought and see how Jesus says this. This is about the discipline and the restoration of a sinning brother or sister. How many? Pardon?
The sentence following changes something. The verse following 20 changes.
Yeah, verse 21, it's a different topic that he introduces, isn't it? Okay. Notice in verse 1, you never want to enlarge the circle beyond what is absolutely minimal. You want to do the minimal thing. If you see a brother or sister sinning, go individually, privately, and confront them. There's no need to enlarge the circle beyond the 2 of you, is there? No need to shame them by bringing in a whole bunch of people. Now, it's interesting, in Asian culture, in many cases, you never confront somebody directly, but you confront them indirectly through another person, a third person. And so this is an interesting quandary that my Asian students have. And so I deal very kindly and gently with them, and I say, well, I understand, and it just comes down to this. Do you want to follow Jesus' words, or do you want to follow your culture's words? That wasn't very kindly and gently, was it? Okay. But the point is, and again, in Asian culture, if someone's older than you, you would never think of confronting them. That you would go through another older person and that. But see, again, you're enlarging the circle beyond what Jesus said. Don't enlarge it unless your brother or sister doesn't respond. Then you take 1 or 2 more so that total it's 2 or 3 and that the facts may be established. And hopefully, as the dial gets turned up, they'll be responsive and deal with their sin and repent and confess it, and we'll move on. But if they don't, verse 17, here's the 3rd step. Tell it to the whole assembly, the whole church. And if they don't respond to the whole church, then, using the language of Judaism and Israel, let them be to you as a Gentile and a tax gatherer, an outsider. Essentially, it's excommunication, isn't it? Now, this is a very painful thing for group-oriented cultures. For Westerners, for Americans, hey, no big deal. I'll just go down to the street to the next church. Yeah, but there wasn't a next church in a lot of communities, obviously, in this time, was there? So this is losing your identity. Now, how does verse 18 function? See that? All right, bringing God into it. And it's kind of summarizing this whole process from a perspective, isn't it? Truly I say to you, whatever you shall bind on earth, who's the you? The church, shall be bound in heaven. And whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Translation? God will honor our church discipline decisions. Now that is pretty heady authority that God bequeaths to the church, isn't it? So you want to enter into this really seriously. And I don't know if you've ever been involved in a church discipline case. I have. It's a little scary when somebody points across the table at you and says, Walt, if you continue this church discipline thing, I will sue you for every penny you have. Generally, I had to work to keep from breaking out laughing, because if they knew how few pennies I had, they would know that's a pretty hollow threat to me. Hey, this is no big deal. But no, this should be something we do very carefully, very somberly, very prayerfully, because God will honor our decisions and our choices. So we want to make sure that we have the facts, that this is accurate, and that this person has had adequate time and input to repent and to be restored to fellowship. That's the goal, isn't it? Restoration. Okay, so you said in verse 19, we got the again, so we know that's part of it, right? You said the two on earth. And then in verse 20, 2 or 3. That comes from verse 16, doesn't it? What else? What else is a repetition? Heaven? Okay. All right. Notice the 2 or 3 then. 2 or 3. On earth, in heaven, again. And then we have the other in heaven, and then the 2 or 3. So there's lots of repetition. Of course, this is a part of it, isn't it? Now, what about the gathering? In verse 20, for where 2 or 3 have gathered, there I am in their midst. What's the gathering we're talking about here? The witnesses in a church discipline thing, right? Do you see that? See, the gathering in verse 20, or again, I say to you that if 2 of you agree on earth about anything, the anything in verse 19, both of those are anything in the gathering of what we're talking about in this paragraph. Do you see that? The meaning of those 2 verses and phrases are boundaried by the topic, the paragraph. It's about church discipline. So what happens when you lift these verses out of their paragraph? The anything becomes anything, unbounded, anything in the world, and the gathered, any kind of gathering whatsoever. Now, I would suggest to you, when we do that, we just changed Jesus' words. And you just changed his very specific promise. This promise, folks, is like most promises in the Bible. It's very specific. This is a promise having to do with church discipline. It's not any Christian gathering whatsoever. It's not when any 2 or 3 Christians get together. It's when 2 or 3 witnesses in a church discipline get together. And what is Jesus saying in verse 19? Where 2 or 3 agree on earth about anything, there may ask, it shall be done for my Father's in heaven. For where 2 or 3 have gathered in my name, there I am in their midst. Now we know Jesus is always with us as an individual believer, isn't it? But this is a special sort of a presence, isn't it? It's authoritative presence. When you're involved in church discipline, my authoritative presence is with you. Now that's unbelievable, isn't it? Because again, this is scary to be involved in church discipline. Okay. He holds us accountable. He's there with us, and yes, he wants to make sure we're accountable and we're good 2 or 3 witnesses, aren't we? So it's a very specific promise about a very specific topic. And the specificity comes from the paragraph. Let me give you kind of a silly example. My wife, Marty, is a great cook. And she will come to my study, and she will ask me, she'll say, Walt, what do you want to eat? I have leftover pork, leftover chicken, leftover beef. Well, ladies, you may know this if you're married, that when guys are focusing on one thing, it's well nigh impossible to be able to multitask and focus on a second thing, right?
Yes.
Yes, especially when they're watching TV, right? You could quote the Gettysburg Address to them, and they would never hear any of it. Okay, I'm right there. Well, I'm focused on working on something in the computer, trying to get something, and so she'll say, "Honey, honey, honey, honey." Oh, yes, dear. Do you want chicken, beef, or pork? Now, my wife's leftovers are better than a lot of folks' first shot at it, okay, so she's a great cook. So I turn and say to her, "Honey, I don't care. I'll eat anything." All right? Am I saying I'll eat concrete, dirt, nails, boards? Is it anything unbounded? No. See, the anything is bounded by what we're talking about, right? That's how language works. Because meaning comes from the top down, from the larger units down to the smaller, isn't it? And when we don't follow this principle, we change the words of Scripture, in this case, the words of Jesus. And you are claiming a promise that Jesus never made. And a lot of people have been disappointed because they claimed a promise for something else that was not related to this. So, folks, this is a discipline that we just have to enter into for reading God's Word, and we need to teach it to our children, our grandchildren, and the youth, and everybody else. And again, we don't read anything else this way. We don't read the newspaper this way. You don't read a cookbook this way. You don't read, any technical stuff. We read it honoring this principle, but because we have this weird kind of mystical, magical view of the Bible, that just take a verse out and it's like a rabbit's foot, like a good luck charm, just rub it. And okay, there we go. There's my verse for the day. And a lot of our devotional books they just do a verse for the day, don't they? And again, what we lose in some cases is what, in this case, Jesus or the Spirit through a human author is saying. We lose what they're saying. And what happens, here's another key point. Scripture is very specific. And when you take it out of its specific context, you abstract it a level or two. And you make it broader and more general. And you change the meaning of it, don't you? In this case, where there's a promise, change the promissory, the grounds of the promise. Now, we do this with a lot of passages, folks. And so we just need to look at the paragraph. Have you ever had anybody say to you, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that." Why can't I do that? Because it has the appearance of evil. Really? Yes. And Scripture says you need to avoid every appearance of evil. Not just evil itself, but what could look evil. Oh, okay. You ever look at that verse in context? Because what we have done with that verse, we made it a broad moral maxim, a broad moral principle that has locked a lot of folks into a whole bunch of legalism. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and we'll end on this one, okay? 1 Thessalonians 5. The paragraph, 1 Thessalonians 5, paragraph begins, that we're looking at in verse 12. And the verse we want to get to is verse 22. Okay? Now, Paul talks about several things, all of them relating to the body of Christ and their unity and prayer and that sort of thing. But let's pick up in verse 19. This is the last topic of the paragraph he deals with. Do not quench the Spirit, that is the Holy Spirit. Do not despise prophetic utterances. This is in the assembly when the church gathers, and some people have the gift of prophecy, and they would have these prophetic utterances. Okay, so don't put out the fire of the Spirit is the idea, and specifically, don't quench the fire of the Spirit that comes through prophetic utterances. Don't despise those. Now, here's what you're supposed to do instead of despising them. Verse 21, but examine everything carefully. Okay, is it biblical? What this person's saying is to square with Scripture. If it doesn't, no. Examine everything carefully. What do you do after you've examined it carefully? Hold fast to that which is good, scriptural, and abstain every form of evil. Abstain every form of evil. What's the evil? What's the form we're talking about? Prophetic utterances that aren't biblical, that they could be evil. And we're to have nothing to do with those. Examine all of them, cling to that which is good, hold to it, but don't have anything to do. You see, that's about a real specific topic, isn't it? And so people lift it out of its paragraph and make it a broad moral principle that isn't a broad moral principle. You see, Jesus violated that. He hung out with some pretty unsavory people, didn't he? Yeah, prostitutes, former demonized people, tax gatherers. Forgive me if you work for the IRS, okay? Jesus hung around with a lot of folks, and we're not to be afraid of being defiled by being with them. And we shouldn't be afraid of people driving by and saying, oh, gee, I saw you talking to such and such a person. You know, that has the appearance of evil. That's not what the Bible says, is it? Now, we need to be wise and know boundaries and all this sort of thing, but this is another verse out of context. So never read a Bible verse. Always read a Bible paragraph. Very good. Okay. Great to be with you. Okay, brother. Next week, we're going to look at 2 Chronicles 7, 11 to 22. 2 Chronicles 7, 11 to 22. And I'm going to give you some new tools and some new skills, okay? So, may I just pray briefly? Lord, we've covered a lot of ground today, but I pray, Father, you would use these principles for reading your word, respecting your word, loving your word, and ultimately loving you, because we're informed about you and about your Son and about you, Holy Spirit, and that we will love you wisely, biblically, and in a way that edifies one another. So thank you for your word to guide us into that. We are so grateful in Jesus' name. Amen.